Motion number 11 is the election strategy to be presented on behalf of the National Executive Committee by Josh Robertson.
But over this weekend, we've discussed and dreamed of a better Scotland. A Scotland that has the funds in the NHS for home birthing. A Scotland that has the powers for a fairer and more progressive form of taxation. A transport system that facilitates and supports communities rather than being a bottleneck and a danger. And most importantly, and not just because I spoke on it, but a Scotland that doesn't lose industrial capacity like Grangemouth, but builds more of it. But after a weekend of dreaming conference, we now have to action it. Now is the time, not to meekly ask for a referendum, not to ask nicely for our sovereignty, but instead to demand what's rightfully ours. Now we must act like a nation and immediately begin negotiations to lift the yoke of unionism and set our country free. Many of us here joined ALBA for two reasons. Number one was independence, and number two was to show our support and belief in Alex Salmond as the only man that we believed could get us there. Sadly, conference, our founder isn't here to speak to this motion, and I'm not going to be callous enough to say I know what Alex wanted. None of us come close to his strategic thinking. But what Alex did leave was his strategy. In conference, this motion was his strategy. It was the reason ALBA was founded, to hold other parties to account and bring independence back onto the agenda. It's been our election strategy in 21 with the supermajority and 24 with the proposal of a Scotland United. We failed the end conference, but as the famous tale about Robert the Bruce goes, when he was at his lowest and hounded, he seen a spider. He watched that spider try and fail to build its web, but through determination and skill was finally able to complete its task. This inspired Bruce to fight for his country's independence, which he successfully delivered. If at first you don't succeed, try again. So what may us do, conference? With our founding leader in our hearts and our friends across the independence movement, we must deliver. We must ensure that not only the dream shall never die, but we must lead to make sure that that dream is delivered. Please support the motion. Thank you.
We know there won't be a referendum, that's out. The Westminster and its government and its Supreme Court have prevented its devolved Parliament at Holyrood, which is what the Scottish Parliament actually is. Westminster's devolved Parliament at Holyrood from holding that. That's from the Supreme Court in November 2022. But a referendum would have been a one-off. Elections come at least every 5 years, and we can call extraordinary elections for independence any time, and that power currently rests with the SNP. I was asked yesterday by somebody who's probably still in the audience, I'm quickly looking, what if Westminster says no? Well, they won't. That's why the referendum was blocked in the first place, because that referendum could have, if it was won, put them into a position of having to say yes to independence, or else they wouldn't be able to hold their head high in the international community. It's one thing to say no to a question, such as, can we have a referendum, please? That is a politician-to-politician interaction. But if a nation votes when what the Supreme Court termed the authority of the ballot box in a democratic culture, that changes the narrative from a politician-to-politician interaction to an individual to a nation. This would be one puny Prime Minister to a nation. A democratic event would have happened, which didn't happen because the Supreme Court blocked it. But an election would be a democratic event happening, and we would then be in a situation where Charles Stuart Parnell said that one man can't say no to the advance of a nation. Now, I would like the 2026 election, of course, to be about independence, but the SNP, currently the largest of the trinity of independence parties, is too punch-drunk to have that. And to make the ask at the election to have a mandate. And we can't claim afterwards that we have a vote for independence if that is not what was said in the manifestos before the ballot box. But if there's no majority for independence itself at the election, we can have a majority for independence parties, so that the possibility is, if we have a majority in the Scottish Parliament, that the possibility of a poll doesn't vanish before 2031. If an SNP vote wasn't for independence in 2026, we have to create the possibility of it being able to happen between all parties for 2031. And obviously for independence, as was said yesterday by a number of speakers, including myself, the SNP needs ALBA and ALBA needs the SNP. This is the combination, with ALBA being the kingmakers for the independence majority.
Conference. Let's look at this motion as read. What is its substance? What are the actions? Line 1. Seeking a mandate for independence. the third paragraph, fought as a plebiscite election. Victory will form the basis to commence negotiations to establish an independent Scottish state. All great stuff, but where's the how? There's then a paragraph about how great it will be. Finally, the action paragraph. ALBA will work with others, supporting independence to both win that election and in forming an independence-focused administration in Holyrood. Conference. It's not a bad motion. It's a very bad motion. In the words of Jack Jarvis, Esquire, birthday cared drivel. An incohesive word salad at best, a feast for the effervescent carrot muncher. Conference. The independence movement are tired and weary. Tired of marching to the top of the hill, then back down again. Successive mandates wasted, wheeshed for Indy. They are desperately needing leadership and a meaningful strategy to deliver for them. The SNP are currently polling at 30%, yet Indy support remains high, around 50%. A lot of Indy people are saying that they won't vote SNP ever again. They've lost hope. That's turned to apathy and despair. They need a party to vote for, a party they can trust, a party that will stand up for women and girls, for Grangemouth, for our pensioners. Conference. SNP 1, ALBA 2 was the right strategy for 2021. Far too much damage has been done since then. By asking the Indy support to vote SNP in the constituencies with the hope of us picking up a handful of list seats is not only madness, but hypocritical.
You see, we had that term, keep doing the same thing time and time again and expect a different result. That was Einstein's parable, and that is what we have done. We have done that for the inception of ALBA. A vote for ALBA is a vote for independence. I wouldn't say it's disingenuous. I would say it's the very same as what we've been doing time and time again. But it's no different sounding for what you get for SNP and the Greens. And the people of Scotland have heard that time and time again. They need substance, they need depth. So when we're speaking on the doorstep, and Kenny, when you're talking to the media, a vote for ALBA is a vote for independence. So what happens when Westminster says no? Well, they're not going to say no, because we've learned for 2014 that it's no we're talking about. It's now is not the time. It's not a priority for him that makes Maggie Thatcher look like a socialist, Sir Keir Starmer. And no disrespect to Tommy Sheridan when I said that. But you see what I'm saying, guys? They're not going to say no, they're just going to ignore us. But here's the other parable you heard. I don't know who was it said it. First they ignore us, then they fight us, and then we win. Now, we need to win in 2026. We can't stand by like a small party that what we are the new. ALBA is the party, the only party that can deliver independence in 2026. But we're not going to do it unless we can show an absolute change in narrative. And that change in narrative isn't going to be a vote for ALBA as a vote for independence. It's going to be something better than that, something that the people of Scotland have absolute clarity on. When you vote for ALBA, it's a vote to dissolve this rancid and decrepit union.
The UK Parliament has never, ever rejected a legal election in either Westminster or the devolved countries or even any Commonwealth country. You've got to have faith in yourself. A plebiscite election is the biggest fear of Westminster. They can cancel us because we stand on it. If the SNP and Greens had voted on September the 18th, 2024, to support 2026 being a plebiscite election, it would be on the news every sodden week till 2026. You've got to have faith in what the plebiscite actually means.
Now, my motives for opposing the motion are very similar to those from the people who want to remit it back. I made the motion. I was entirely in favour. I even liked the last bit that says we will cooperate with other independent supporting parties. I was then astonished to find out that the SNP is apparently counted as an independent supporting party. If I believed the SNP was an independent supporting party, I would not be here. I would still be in the SNP. The reason we left the SNP is the SNP is not an independent supporting party. The last gentleman who spoke, nobody disagrees with you. We all believe this should be a plebiscite election. But anyone believing that John Swinney is going to agree to fight an independent plebiscite election alongside in cooperation with ALBA and have the same descriptor between the SNP and ALBA on the ballot paper is living in cloud cuckoo land. It is a ludicrous fantasy.
Sometimes you need to lose a battle to win a war. So if that means that we have to recognise that the SNP have a place to play, or more importantly, the rank-and-file membership have a place to play, then let's lose that battle. But let's win the war of independence, because what's more important? Getting one over on the SNP, keeping out Angus Robertson, or in 2026, delivering independence in 2 to 3 years from now? You know, I've listened to those asking to ream it back, and I don't doubt their passion for independence for a minute. And I like them, I respect their views. But we do a huge disservice to the rank-and-file members of the SNP and all those people out there that aren't in any party, but by God they want an independent Scotland. So we've got to recognise our capabilities and not mix up our ambition with our capability. I stood, as many others, in 2024. You know, we must have spent over £100,000 contesting 19 seats. And what did we get? A handful of votes and nobody elected. Do we want to take the hard-earned money of every poor impoverished person giving £1 a month towards the ALBA party and throw it away on constituency elections that we can't win? Or can we use it to pay for social media campaigns and walking out in the street and getting the votes of the common people that we need? I would rather see our money spent when it can make a difference, not thrown down the drain where it's not going to achieve anything practical. So let's please remember one thing. Only one thing is going to get success in 26, and that's unity. That's every person that wants independence working together with a common purpose. And if we get that maximum majority, think if you translated Angus Brendan's numbers into a parliament in 2026, independents would sleep the street. So don't waste it by listening to the remit back. Support this motion.
Thank you, Steve.
So I think it's really good, actually, that we've got members that are talking about a whole range of issues, because they're all valid. I don't think it is an either-or, you're wrong and you're right. You know, there are various things that you need to take into consideration. You know, you get about £60,000 credit for Royal Mail for every constituency you stand in. So there's a nuance there in terms of, you know, potentially you could stand in the odd constituency, but really they're a paper candidate, because it's just about adding extra profile onto your regional list vote. But my understanding is that that's not what we're discussing today, whether ALBA's a list-only party or whether we're a list party and a constituency party, because I don't think there's anything that specifically says that in the motion, and I think there should be a future debate that we get to come prepared and set our stalls out coherently as to why we should only be a list-only party, which is the direction of travel I think I'm swaying in, whereas, you know, last year I thought we should have stood our top candidate in one constituency in every region to give us that presence, as I say, get us that wee bit extra resource. But the world's moved on, and Robert Reid's slideshow earlier on shows you the world's moved on. Over the last 2 years, the Greens have become very adversarial to the SNP in the Scottish Parliament, and, you know, we watch everything. There's nothing that happens in Parliament or on social media that we don't miss. But the majority of the public, they just see a Green Party attacking the SNP, and they've seen the ALBA Party, obviously through the sad loss of Alec, talking about a lot of the achievements he made in government. They've seen Ash Regan supporting the government in a budget, and lo and behold, SNP favourability sways towards the ALBA Party. So one of the niche things about the remit back is that you kind of get pigeonholed with everybody else, but the reality is I think every single person supporting the remit backs for different reasons. Of course, Jimmer would have second your remit back anyway. But the remit back for me is because, you know, and I'm happy if the remit back falls, because I think this is a perfectly sensible position to be setting out. But ALBA Party already has an independent strategy. We agreed it at our Aberdeen National Council. We reinforced and endorsed that at our National Council. So when the mover of the motion sums up, I'd like a bit of clarity on this point to see whether I'm going to withdraw my support for the remit back or not. This is our strategy. We fight on the election, every single election, and if we get over 50% of the vote, that's a mandate for independence. But Alex Salmond's strategy had one other very important aspect. We then hold a referendum in the Scottish Parliament on the powers of the Scottish Parliament, asking the question, should the Scottish Parliament have the powers to negotiate for and legislate for independence? And with that democratic mandate, with your overwhelming supermajority for independence in your Parliament, and then with that democratic outrage expressed by the people of Scotland in a referendum saying, yes, our Parliament is sovereign, then you take that sovereignty and you take that mandate, and that's how you go to Westminster to declare your independence.
Robert.
Not for the first time, I agree with much of what Chris McElhenney has just said there. You know, this is an important conference a year out until the most important election in this party's history. Are we seriously going to remit back leadership's motion on our election strategy and leave the party in limbo for 6 months until the next election and the next conference? I don't think so. I think I'd like to address a couple of the points made by the remit back. I mean, Jim McElhenney says, you know, SNP 1, ALBA 2 is madness. Jim is absolutely correct, but that is not what this motion says. We're voting on what the motion says, not what people are putting into it. I think, I mean, Craig Murray, very good speech, but again, is addressing points that the motion does not make. He talked about the Edinburgh Central constituency and saying that, you know, we're going to be encouraging people to vote for Angus Robertson. No, we're not. The constituency vote will be free for anyone to decide, but if our message at the election must be and should be to appeal to those SNP voters, list vote ALBA to maximise the yes representation. As I have showed in the slide before, the presentation before, people are aware of us now. People are liking what we're saying. SNP voters are warming to us. It would be ridiculous to stand in constituencies risking their seats, putting SNP voters off because of our own personal dislike or contempt for certain individuals. Now, I'll just finish with one little point that, or rather big point that Alec once said to me. I got a phone call from him. I was a bit of a bollocking over the phone, actually, because I tweeted something a bit daft. And he said, you know, people in this party need to start focusing on ALBA and not focusing on the SNP. But it's by focusing on ALBA that we are going to be successful. Park your hatred, park your contempt for these people, and back ALBA to the fullest extent. And fundamentally, the only way we are going to win seats in the next election is on the list vote. So that's the way we should go. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil.
Thank you very much, Chair. Conference, our antipathy for certain individuals within the SNP shouldn't cloud us from our ambition for this party. We know that in the SNP there are many, many supporters, members who are as committed to independence as we are in this hall. They may not have reached the point where they don't feel able to stay in the party any longer, but they remain our friends, they remain our fellow travellers on the journey to independence, and we need to attract their support. We don't have the luxury of fighting constituency seats with an endless supply of funds and volunteers. That's just the reality. Our priority, our mission, as I said yesterday, is to deliver as many ALBA Party MSPs as possible. The more constituency we fight, the less support we're likely to attract from SNP voters. That is just a fact. And so the priority is to deliver a strategy that delivers the most
ALBA party MSPs into our Parliament to make sure that the strategies that Alec envisaged that we would take forward in that Parliament to make independence a reality can be actioned, because there's no benefit to being principled to the extent that you're never elected. That is the choice. Do we want to elect MSPs, yes or no? So I think we should, let's support the motion. Let's get a strategy together that will deliver MSPs for the ALBA party into our Parliament. And then we can mount a convincing argument for independence and press forward with ambition for Scotland.
It's not a remit back we need. It's moving forward. We've lost 5 months already because of a tragedy. We're not turning the page on Alec's strategy. We're reading from his script and we're building on his legacy. I endorse everything that Ray James very eloquently said. The fact is that even Margaret Thatcher has acknowledged that if the Scots vote for it, the Scots can get it. They are, in the main, very democratic people and they will accept it. But can I say, see if that wasn't to happen, I am not going to publicly tell the British government what our tactics are going to be. This isn't about who's the most macho for independence. I don't think it will happen. But if it does, let me tell you, we will have a plan. But we're not telling them what that is before we have to cross that bridge. But I endorse everything that Robert Reid and Angus very eloquently spelt out. But I also refer you back to the great eulogy made by Duncan Hamilton speaking about our friend and former leader Alec at the memorial in St Giles. He said he was a great coalition builder. And we have to recognise that we're building and going to get our votes from the well of independent supporters. There's two categories there. First of all, there are the independence voters. And Craig, we have to disagree on between the leadership and indeed the membership. I was writing a column for the National and a lady came and asked to come in. She was in the church next door. This is the hall of her church. I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning her name. Many of you in Edinburgh, like SNP, and indeed the wider SNP, will know a wonderful lady. She's a member of the SNP. I am not going to berate. She is a fine, decent woman. I disagree that she's still a member of the SNP, but I like and respect her, and I can tell you, there are thousands of people I like and respect out there thinking about coming over, not only joining, but certainly voting. But see if we go out and make a full frontal attack about how horrible the SNP are, then I'm publicly slapping in the face. I disagree with Swinney and SNP leadership, and we will not hesitate in challenging their sins, their failures and their omissions. But I plead with the likes of give us your list vote, recognise the logic in it and recognise that we're on the same side. I'm already getting emails in from SNP branches telling me what's going on and telling me that they're going SNP 1, ALBA 2. We can't go to war with them. And Craig, you are right. There is a wider vote out there that no longer supports the SNP and for good reasons in many instances will not vote for the SNP. There are some that I would struggle myself to vote for, but that vote will be galvanised to us by appealing to them, by going out, as indeed when I was disturbed by I'm delighted to catch up with her again. I was writing the column for the National about how those people who have been spoken down against, who have been demotivated, who have been told to stop marching, who have been told to wheesh, all of these things. We need to appeal to them. They're our core support, along with the... We need to make sure that we're out there and all under one banner, at hope over fear, reviving the Yes movement, because what got us so close and Alec nearly delivered was based not in Holyrood with SNP MSPs. It was in the grassroots of our housing schemes. It was in the artists and the civil rights readers. It was in all the decent, ordinary people who knew that Scotland could do so much better in an independent nation and were prepared to vote for it.
Alec began every episode of Scotland Speaks with the words, "This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. Therefore, it is my great honour to introduce to you the historian and the original lad o' Pairts, Owen Dudley-Edwards, to tell us more about Alec's immense and unrivalled contribution to our past and to Scotland's story, the final chapters of which are still to be written. A Fellow of the University of Edinburgh, he has published widely on the history, culture and literature of Ireland, not least of all in relation to its founding father, Eamon de Valera, as well as writing and commentating on Scotland and the United States. Owen is one of our foremost thinkers and intellectuals, along with the late Tom Nairn, Stephen Maxwell and Neil Asherson, has been a major proponent of what has become known as left-wing nationalism. He dedicated his latest book, Our Nations and Nationalisms, to his ever-loving wife, Bonnie Dudley-Edwards, who I'm delighted to say is also with us today, and to Alec. He called both Bonnie and Alec his two great creators. I can think of no one who is better placed to offer his own reflections on the immense contribution to the history of Scotland and the independence movement. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm reception to Owen Dudley-Edwards.
What would Alex Salmond be doing if he were here today, if he was speaking to you now? He would be making us laugh, because that was one of the signal qualities of his character, of his place in history, and his achievement for Scotland. He was essentially a laughing statesman who made the rest of us laugh too, who in so many respects constantly appealed to the sense of humour, who made pomposity what we were trying to destroy, who made joy what we were trying to achieve, who believed in a humanity which would redeem its horrible crimes from seeing not only the evil, but the contemptibility, the self-righteousness which accompanied them. He was someone, as I think of his place in history, I think he would be quite pleased with me for quoting from Bernard Shaw's play about the American Revolution, The Devil's Disciple, in which at one point General Burgoyne explains to a stupid subordinate among the British higher command that the force of George III was about to have to surrender at Saratoga. And the wretched underling says, "But, sir, what will history say?" And Burgoyne replies, "History, sir, will tell lies as usual." Now, Alec would be all in favour of our remembering that, and to remember that what we are there to eradicate. For the kind of history which, a matter of 100 years ago, was being taught and continued down the centuries, so often being taught in all the schools, was a history which airbrushed Scotland very largely out, except for a great deal of stuff about the gallant regiments who did so much to build up the empire, etc., etc. Alec was, of course, historian himself, trained at St Andrews, and who, like St Margaret, he was a medieval historian, and he would be glad that I should mention St Margaret, Queen of Scotland, that refugee, that asylum seeker, who herself did so much as Queen to build up the links between Aberdeen and Edinburgh, which Alec is a St Andrews graduate, between St Andrews and Edinburgh, and as a St Andrews graduate, and did so much to unite the intellectual traditions of there and here, to join up with the greater understanding of Scotland's history and to encourage it in so many directions. And as a medievalist, of course, he would have looked back to the first reference to a Scotland long before it was called Scotland, 2,000 years ago, the Battle of Mons Graupius, at the beginning of which Calgacus, the leader of the forces against the Roman Empire, ended with the words, speaking of the Romans, "They have made a desert and called it peace." And that, of course, 2,000 years later, is what is still happening. And in the name of empire, in the name of force, in the name of bloodshed, we are still being told to put our humanity behind us, to forget all about what a true welfare state needs, what seeking to the welfare of the weakest of us, the poorest of us, the most wounded of us, all to be swept aside so that more and more money be spent on weapons of mass destruction. So that tradition of peace was what he testified to, spelled out to us for, and led us towards. If we talk about mistakes, looking back from history, we have to remember that, yes, history does tell lies in all sorts of ways. Because of Alex's primacy about the importance of intellect and the furtherance of intellect and the pursuit of true history, therefore, we will find a better kind of history. We must remember that when Alex first emerged in politics, about the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, that until the SNP began to make gains, your characteristic figure was Anstruther Gray, Member of Parliament for East Lothian, when interviewed in the 1964 election, was asked, "Do you know your constituency?" and replied, "Certainly, I've hunted over it several times." That was the kind of parliamentary representation Scotland had. It was a carpetbag country, Scottish nationalism, but above all, led by the tremendous prowess, wisdom, and laughter of Alex Salmond was what ensured that Scotland would have to be thought of in terms of human international history, the history of non-violent constitutionalism, the history of somebody who was ready to take the fullest possible advantage where need be in tactics and strategy. As a non-violent man, he was a wonderful general, and he knew exactly how to be so. Looking back upon his life and drawing on it again and again, seeing how often so many figures in Scottish history, figures of that kind of courage, figures including Mary Queen of Scots giving her life for her religion, those figures of courage, those figures of conviction, those believers in humanity, what pride we can take of him, but how much we must ensure he is not simply dwarfed to the level of just a politician. He was somebody who stands across those 2,000 years of Scottish history and brings it to still so magnificent and triumphant a continuation. Let us pledge ourselves to go forward in his name and thanking God for it, despite the fact that, like Jesus Christ, he was so often betrayed and, in a real sense, gave his life for us.
As we've just heard, it will be impossible. It would be impossible. It is impossible to replace Alex Salmond. However, Kenny McCaskill has little need to try because alongside Alex since their school days, he has carved out a reasonably large chunk of a place in Scotland's story independently. As a lawyer, a campaigner, an MSP from 1999 to 2014, a Cabinet Secretary for 7 of those years, and as ALBA's first Member of Parliament. He's unafraid to stand up for what's right, against the might of the state, against international pressure, or the wiles of errant political leaders. It was Kenny who recruited me to ALBA, and from Gaza to Grangemouth, UK military action in Iraq and Scottish sovereignty, and on the injustice of fuel-poor Scots in energy-rich Scotland, no voice has been stronger. Kenny is a fierce, passionate advocate for truth and justice, and it was an honour to serve alongside him in Westminster, and it has been my duty to stand with him since Alex's sad passing and recent challenging times. He was Alex's choice of deputy for a reason, and your choice of ALBA party leader similarly so. Conference, please give it up for Kenny McCaskill.
Thanks, colleagues, and thanks, Neil. It was fitting that we heard Owen's tribute. Alec was our founder, our leader, and most of all, our friend. His passing is a tragedy for us all, his family, his friends, and our nation. His eloquence, as well as his banter, sorely missed. I'd like to just record my own personal tribute to the man I now require to follow in office, and who I was privileged to know and work with over decades. We went back a long way, even to school, as Neil said. We had our ups and downs, as happens in any close relationship. But he always knew that we had each other's backs and we'd be at each other's side. I recall meeting him with Jim Sillars when scurrilous allegations were first made against him. The irony of two who had challenged him the most during his leadership, at his side when others cravenly colluded, departed, or remain silent. But such are how strong friendships are formed, through mutual respect. We had campaigned in the West Lothian we grew up in, been comrades in the 79 group, fought Thatcher's hated poll tax, and taken old SNP into government. I was with him when he was vindicated in the Court of Session in January 2019, when Lord Pentland, now the Lord President, Scotland's most senior judge, found that the Scottish Government had acted illegally, unfairly, and tainted by apparent bias. Shamefully, rather than accepting the court's conclusions, Leslie Evans stated they had lost a battle, not the war. Alec then having to endure a criminal trial, almost unprecedented in its scale, yet one in which a jury of his peers acquitted him on all charges. I stood with him through it all, and I was with him when he made his political turn, forming our party. He will never be forgotten. He is part of our soul, he's in our DNA, and we will deliver his dream. I was honoured to be supported in my decision to stand for leadership by those closest to him and who he loved the most. Equally, we will not forget that a great wrong was done to him. I will not comment on ongoing court proceedings, but justice needs done for Alex Salmond. disclosure of all documents by the Scottish Government and other agencies are required, as there should also be a judge-led inquiry into the actions of that government and individuals within it. Justice demands no less. And this party will never cease remembering our mentor and seeking justice for him. For the naysayers who proclaim that our cause is passed along with Alec, they should remember they slandered the great Parnell, and despite his passing, Ireland still became free. Which takes me on to my new role. It's one I never sought and for which we all wish a need had never arisen. But as with stepping up as acting leader following his passing, it's what he'd have expected. I've sought to steady the ship and now seek to build on his legacy as we go forward for him and our cause. And I'm grateful to staff who continue to serve us during this trying time, and Tasmina in particular, and to the NEC and office bearers for sharing the load. For Alec, we'd as always expect us to get focused and prepare, for it's now up to us to deliver the dream he came so close to achieving of Scottish independence. I'm minded of another independence campaign, this time that of the United States of America. As conflict waged, Thomas Jefferson was dispatched to Paris to succeed Benjamin Franklin as US ambassador there, and where an alliance for America's independence was essential. When it was suggested that he was a replacement for the greatest of the founding fathers, Jefferson commented, "No one can replace him, sir. I am only his successor." But I step up along with each and every one of you to play our part in concluding his great journey. I am honoured to lead a party which remains true to its principles of Scottish independence and a just and fair society. For Alec's love of Scotland was rooted in its people and in seeking to advance their cause. Not the lords or ladies, but the common folk in our communities, the length and breadth of this land, from wherever and whenever they may have come, but who have made this their home. I do, though, have to start with a confession. One I hope you can forgive me. What is my sin? Well, I drive a Tesla. Aye, Mr. Musk's car. Not his, of course, but one made by his firm, though, which is losing sheer value day upon day as he spouts his venom. But I was offered it for free, and being a canny Scot, I took it, giving my battered Skoda to my youngest. But I can assure you that whilst I drive a Tesla, it won't stop me denouncing the evils of these oligarchs and the society they seek to ferment. Indeed, to be fair, it's a right good car, and it helps me get around to spread our gospel and counteract his bile. But frivolity aside, there's work to do. Alec has bequeathed us all a great legacy. For the nation, it's in the benefits and infrastructure all around. For our party, it's the base he built and the strategy that he left. His plan in 2021 was correct. It was timing which undermined it. In elections, you can get them spectacularly wrong and pay the price. You can get them right and reap the rewards. But there's also times when what you do is right, but the timing just isn't. And so it was in 2021, a backdrop of COVID, the hostility of Nicola Sturgeon and our SNP 1 and 2 call, despite knowing the outcome, and even the overhang from the unjust court cases he faced. But it was the correct strategy. Scotland would be a better place had ALBA made the breakthrough in 2021. There would have been no tawdry Butte House agreement and the travesty of the coalition with the Greens. But we move on, as Alec was preparing to go again. A list vote for ALBA and not a wasted vote for SNP has never been clearer to independent supporters. ALBA provides an independence vote which can count for independent supporters. There's a growing number who support independence but won't vote SNP. Alex Salmond's government, in which I was proud to serve, were noted for their competency, capability and credibility. Yet now, from ferries through deposit return schemes to the shameful ScotWind sell-off, it looks a distant dream. And that's without mentioning gender self-ID. We give a reason and a party to vote for to those committed to independence. one which can provide that independence majority given the voting system. So we will work with the independence movement and with all independent supporting parties for our common cause. We will work with the SNP, but it doesn't mean that we won't call out their errors or fail to challenge them on their actions. But would they really prefer to align with a unionist party to stay in power rather than side with fellow independent supporters to deliver our cause? This is their chance to live up to their rhetoric, and which has been missing these last 9 years. For our land is blessed with great talent and wealth, yet it's scarred by immigration and assets being taken for a song. The tragedy of Scotland is not how bad things are for so many. The lives of many, and especially children, are blighted by excruciating and worsening poverty. But many, if not most, this is a great place, and our lives are comfortable. The real tragedy of Scotland is that for a land blessed with so much, it is underperformed and under-delivered. A nation provided with assets such as its great universities, its industrial base and entrepreneurial skills, and especially its two natural bounties of oil and gas and now renewable energy. Yet lands with far less have delivered so much more. I recall chapping a door in the 1980s to be met by an old lady from County Mayo, incredulous that I saw independence like her economically troubled native land. Yet now the economy of the Emerald Isle shines, and its people's wealth is greater than ours, despite having far less advantages. The difference is Ireland is independent, making mistakes, of course, but able to remedy them when they do. There's a lesson there for us. I was driven home after the Westminster elections when I went to Estonia and Finland on business. I left a Grangemouth and ALBA, which I had known since my childhood, and in the doldrums, if not despair. Estonia and Finland, I found, were booming, and far from the lands I had visited years before. I first went to Estonia in 1996, only a handful of years after it had escaped the Soviet yoke, and the challenges they faced were immense. But they had done so, and the vibrancy of their economy and wealth in their society was evident. Finland, likewise, a land lost almost 40% of its GDP in exports when the Soviet Union collapsed. But without oil or gas in the Baltic Sea or renewables in the Gulf of Finland, but it has a higher income and a greater standard of living for its people, and it doesn't have the poverty and despair that blights ours. What marks out those lands is that they are independent nations, the same as Norway or Denmark, and where again they're outperforming our land with less advantages than held by Scotland. It's why independence remains essential. It's why we need to prepare for 2026 and get organised and get working. We need to explain the how and why of independence and get out and take it onto the doors and the streets of our cities, towns and villages. Social media is all fine and well, but the old-time religion in what we say and how we do it is also required. Housing, health, jobs and the economy are to the fore for people, and meeting them face-to-face is essential. Nor, though, will we forget others or our place in the world. We were told in 2014 that Britain would be a force for good. Instead, it's not just complicit, but facilitating a genocide in Gaza, selling arms... selling arms and allowing its military bases to be used. Oh, for Scotland to be an independent nation speaking out against this horror like Ireland. We seek not just a better and fairer country, but a better and fairer world, and one that avoids precipitating us into World War III. ALBA will never endorse Scottish boots on the ground in Ukraine. It's peace we need, and edging away from a nuclear holocaust where Scotland shamefully remains a prime target. To achieve the breakthrough, Neil and I will be travelling the country, supporting activists along with other office bearers. You can see me in my Tesla. Ash will be leading from the front in Holyrood, continuing our sterling efforts, promoting independence and protecting women and children. Together, we can get our message out. That's also the way to tackle reform in the populist right. It's not a meeting of failing politicians that's required, but action on public services. It's failures in housing, health and employment which are fuelling frustration among so many. The scapegoating of a minority, just a cover for insidious forces who would privatise the NHS, undermine workers' rights and further enrich the oligarchs. This party will always oppose such views, whether from reform or individuals, no matter how rich and powerful. The how is to make this Holyrood contest a plebiscite election, where every vote for ALBA is a vote for independence. Nicola Sturgeon's folly of a Supreme Court challenge, one of many it has to be said. Any organisation with UK in their name are never likely to be sympathetic, and she knew that. We've debated that, and it will be our policy platform. No more, please, sir, can we have another referendum. We will neither demean ourselves nor delude the Scottish people. With a referendum ruled out, the democratic route to independence is through an election. Even Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, recognised that if the Scots vote for independence, they will get independence. The Supreme Court ruled out a referendum, but recognised the legitimacy of an election. That's why every vote for ALBA is a vote for independence. A majority of votes cast for independence parties at this Holyrood election must be our Independence Day. But as well as the how, we also require to make the case for the why. Polls continually show support for independence higher than in 2014 and often ahead. Yet people don't see it as coming or even appreciate the need for it. It's like Scotland qualifying for the World Cup, something nice to have, but without understanding the necessity or sometimes even believe it's going to come. It's why we must show the link between constitutional change and social and economic advancement. And nothing makes the case for independence more than the absurdity of an energy-rich land seeing half of its people in fuel poverty, as we held so eloquently earlier by Peter Fanning. Or a major oil-producing nation seeing its refinery shut, as we heard from Chris Hamilton yesterday. An energy-rich land where our natural resources exploited with no economic benefits for our country, and yet facing the environmental damage as it's transmitted south. Labour's sellout of Grangemouth and the tokenism of a brass plate on an office in Aberdeen is not what's needed for Scotland's energy wealth. The tragedy of the Scottish Government, as Peter said, is they neither tried nor even protested. We must show that independence can allow us to benefit from our natural resources, to provide for our people just as Norway, Denmark and other nations do. Independence is no guarantee that mistakes won't be made. They've been done by other nations, as Ireland experienced, the same as they've been made in Scotland under devolution. But the reason that independence is essential is that only Scotland can solve Scotland's problems and remedy Scotland's mistakes. Only Scots will put Scotland's interests first, and only an independent nation can do that, which is why independence is the key. We were lied to in 2014. Brexit was foisted on us, sterling has plummeted, austerity is morphing, and Britain acting shamefully and cravenly internationally. And the future of Britain is frightening. It was a Labour MP who told me that Labour faces a thrashing with a reformed Tory coalition inheriting. Boris Johnson would seem a paragon of virtue if that happens. It's why Scotland needs to be independent. Colleagues, we inherited a great legacy from Alex Salmond. It's now up to us to build on his bequest and to deliver the dream he cherished. We work together to achieve that. A breakthrough in 2026 is coming, but the scale of it depends on what we do. That's all of us. It's the collective that will deliver for our cause, not an individual. It was that people's movement in 2014 which took us so close and which still remains. Our role is to energise them, work with them and together make the case for independence which Scotland so badly and urgently requires, and that's why it has to be Lisbo Alba for independence and for Alex Salmond. Thank you.